Some stories from history are just so epic, so dramatic. They feel more like a myth than something that actually happened. The Siege of Masada? It's definitely one of those. It's a tale of rebellion, of incredible defiance, and a final desperate act that has been talked about for almost 2,000 years. So let's dive into this epic showdown between a handful of rebels and the full, terrifying might of the Roman Empire. Okay, so first you've got to picture this place. This is Masada. It's this enormous, flat-topped rock that just juts out of the Judean desert. One ancient historian put it perfectly. He called it lofty, isolated, and to all appearance impregnable. And he's not wrong. It's a natural fortress with only one ridiculously narrow, winding path up to the top called the Snake. This is the stage for our story. So before it became the setting for this legendary siege, what exactly was this place? And more importantly, who were the people who decided this was where they were going to make their final stand? Well, Masada's story as this amazing fortress actually starts way earlier, with none other than King Herod the Great. Way back between 37 and 31 BC, he's the one who turned this mountain into a seriously fortified palace. He built it as a personal safe haven, just in case the rebellion broke out. The irony, of course, is that it would one day be used for that exact purpose, just not by him. All right, now let's meet the rebels. They were known as the Sicarii, a pretty hardcore group of Jewish extremists who were part of the bigger First Jewish-Roman War. In 66 AD, led by a guy named Eleazar ben Yair, they actually managed to take Masada from the Roman soldiers stationed there. And for years, they used this incredible fortress as their home base, launching raids on the surrounding areas. After Rome had basically crushed the rest of the rebellion, these guys were the last holdouts. Now, for the Roman Empire, you just can't have this symbol of defiance sitting out there. It's not an option. So what came next was one of the most incredible siege operations in all of military history. The matchup here is it's almost absurd. On one side, you've got the Sicarii, this community of rebels with their families, totally isolated on top of a mountain. And on the other side, you have the full-blown war machine of the Roman Empire. We're talking the famous Legion 10 Fretensis, plus thousands of auxiliaries and even prisoners of war who were forced to help. The mismatch in scale is staggering. And just how staggering are we talking? Well, on the rebel side, the total number of people inside Masada, and that's men, women, and children, was just 967. That's it. And the Roman army they sent to deal with them? Somewhere around 15,000. That is more than 15 Roman soldiers for every single person in that fortress. The Romans weren't just coming to win a fight, they were coming to make a very, very clear statement. So how in the world do you attack an impregnable fortress? Well, the Romans didn't bother with that narrow snake path. Oh no. They decided to bring the ground right up to the fortress wall. They built this absolutely colossal siege ramp by moving an estimated 500,000 tons of earth and rock. It is an insane feat of engineering and a terrifying testament to just how determined the Romans were. After months of hard labor, once that ramp was finally finished, the end was pretty much a foregone conclusion. It all happened methodically. First, the Romans built a giant siege tower on top. Then, they pushed that tower, with its battering ram, right up to the wall. On April 16, 73 AD, using torches to burn through a wooden support wall, they finally broke through the defenses. And it's right here, in this moment, as the Romans are breaking through, that the story takes its most famous and, honestly, its most chilling turn. This is the version of the story that's been told for centuries. According to the historian Josephus, the rebel leader, Eleazar ben Yair, gave this incredible, fiery speech. He convinced his followers that choosing a glorious death was far preferable to a life of infamy as Roman slaves. They decided to die free. So when the Roman soldiers finally burst into the fortress, ready for a bloody final fight, all they found was this eerie, deathly silence. Josephus tells us they found a citadel of death. Almost everyone was gone. The buildings were all on fire, except, and this part is key, the storerooms. They were full of food, left untouched to prove to the Romans that this was a choice, not a surrender to starvation. It is an unbelievable story of defiance. Maybe a little too unbelievable. And over the last few decades, archaeologists and historians have started to ask that one very critical question. is this what really happened? And this is where we get to put on our detective hats, because this is where that single ancient account smacks right up against the hard evidence that's been literally dug out of the ground. So here's the catch, and it's a big one. This whole dramatic story of a heroic final act, it all comes from one guy, Flavius Josephus. And his backstory is complicated. He was actually a Jewish rebel commander himself before he was captured, switched sides, and then became a historian for his new Roman bosses. He wasn't even at Masada. He's our only literary source for what went down. And this is where it gets really interesting. Because when archaeologists finally excavated Masada, the story they found in the dirt didn't quite line up with Josephus's neat tale. Sure, they found skeletons, but they were in caves and other spots, not in a way that screamed organized mass suicide. They found signs of lots of separate fires, not one big blaze. Plus, some scholars now argue that the timeline Josephus lays out for the speech and everything that followed is basically impossible. The Romans would have stormed the breachway way too fast. The modern view, which is summed up really well here by the scholar Shai Cohen, is that the archaeology shows Josephus's account is, at best, incomplete and inaccurate. The real story was probably a lot messier. Maybe some fought to the death, maybe some did take their own lives, and maybe a whole lot of others were just killed by the invading Roman soldiers. Okay, so if the actual history is so murky, how did this one specific story, the heroic mass suicide, become so incredibly famous? Well, that's where an ancient story gets turned into a powerful, modern legend. In the 20th century, the story was reborn as what scholars now call the Masada myth. This was basically a new narrative that took Josephus's accounts and kind of smoothed out all the messy parts, like the fact that the Sicarii were extremists who even raided other Jewish villages, and instead it recast them as these unified national heroes. And this myth, it became unbelievably powerful. As the scholar Clara Politai puts it, Masada became a symbol for a heroic last stand for the state of Israel and played a major role for Israel in forging national identity. The story of choosing death over slavery became a deeply resonant idea, especially in the context of modern Jewish history. Today, the place itself has been completely transformed. It's a huge tourist destination, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It has become, as one writer called it, the performance space of national heritage, a stage where military ceremonies were once held, and where this story of heroic sacrifice is told again and again. Which leaves us with a really fascinating final question. The story of Masada shows us that history isn't just about what happened, it's also about the stories we choose to tell about what happened, why we tell them, and how those stories end up shaping who we are. It makes you wonder, when a story becomes history, who really gets to be the author?